welcome back. It's fast approaching 32 minutes after 9 o'clock. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with me, Nana Acquia, and Martin Daubney.
And let's look at today's front pages now.
So, the Mirror dedicates its front page to Brazilian football icon Pelé, who's died aged 82 following a battle with cancer.
The Daily Star calls Pelé the real GOAT, the greatest of all time, with this iconic image of the Brazilian legend and then England captain Bobby Moore. I absolutely adore that image.
Now, the Times leads on claims by ministers that a cost of strike action will force unions to climb down as soon as the spring.
And the Telegraph reports Rishi Sunak is considering the return of restrictions for arrivals from COVID-hit China, with the Health Secretary meeting Sir Chris Whitty and Jenny Harries today.
Now, the Mail reports that millions of families are struggling with an average of over £16,000 in personal debt as unsecured borrowing hits record levels.
On to the Independent. NHS leaders have warned the health service is not equipped to tackle the so-called parallel pandemic of mental health exacerbated by lockdown and the cost of living crisis.
Right, so time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning is political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People, Nigel Nelson, also broadcaster Liz Kershaw.
So, who's first and what have we got?
Should we start
Let's
with
go to Liz.
Yeah, let's do this. Liz, Save Our Streets in the Telegraph. What's that all about?
Well, in my day, you went through disco, and the worst thing that could happen to you was maybe you had a couple too many Cinzano Biancos and you had a long queue for a taxi. But the stories this week of people going out for an innocent night out and never going home again have terrified me. There were two in particular. One is about a lad on Christmas Eve who went to a nightclub in Birmingham and was stabbed to death on the dance floor.
Terrible, terrible.
But the club has protested that they have airport-style security to get in. You're scanned for metal objects, such as knives, all sorts of checks, and security guards inside. And I thought, what kind of atmosphere is that to go partying? And then this girl outside a pub, outdoors in Wallasey. So, really, really scary stuff. My real point was about the coverage of this. And I've said this before. I've watched the television news headlines and stories, and the girl in Wallasey, the coverage of her death has been given far more prominence and has been far higher up the news agenda than this lad in Birmingham. And it's the same in the papers today, where she might be on page 2, he might be on page 7.
I think it's partly because, I mean, she's very attractive.
It's exactly that.
Do you think that's what it is?
It's exactly that. But a life isn't worth more. You know, as a blonde myself, you know, I don't see why. It's the same with other murders of blonde lovelies, and of course she's treasured. It's heartbreaking. But if I was the parents of this lad who is 23 and a an amateur football, I wouldn't see his life as being of less importance. But it's the same thing again.
Well, I think that both of them have had a lot of coverage. I don't think it's been skewed particularly one way or the other. I mean, a lot of it's to do with what the story is. I mean, that she was shot by complete accident, as far as we can gather. He had no connection with anything. So that in itself, you know, lifts the story up there.
I also think one was a gun crime, one's knife crime, and gun crime, mercifully, is still rarer in Britain, at least for now, than knife crime. Nigel, moving on to your first choice of story. In the Times, we have the further ongoing furore around transgender in sport.
That's right, yes. I mean, without trying to open the entire transgender debate, which always gets me into trouble, the World Boxing Council may have come up with an answer which is causing problems about how trans people slot into sport. Basically, whether someone born a man can join in women's sport.
They shouldn't be allowed to do it, in my opinion.
Well, the World Boxing Council actually agrees with you on this, and what they're saying is that there should be a separate category for trans fighters, and those most trans fighters would be only someone born a man would be able to fight against somebody else who was born a man. You don't mix the two things up, but you have a separate area that they wouldn't compete against non-trans fighters, have their own league, have their own tournament. It sounds like a good idea.
Well, it sounds like the obvious idea. I mean, I don't know why they haven't thought of that. I said that at the beginning. I mean, it sounds
well, do you remember the weightlifting not long ago? So you're a bloke and you're a bit rubbish at weightlifting, so you identify as a woman and suddenly you're the world champion gold medal winner.
I just want to point out that one of the heroines of this topic is Sharon Davis, the former Olympic
She's been behind.
who's been right on this cause all the year. And for somebody like Gary Lineker, final pop of the year, Saint Lineker, who has an opinion about everything politically, he's been very, very silent on transgenderism in sport.
Now listen, I've got to move on to this one because it's Prince Harry and his discount book, Spare. Giles said spare as the detail is. I mean, his book's already on sale.
Well, it is. There must be a lot going spare because I saw it in the second week of December in WH Smith's in Kent. It was reduced to half price before it was even physically available, and it's the Star's reporting that WH Smith are now selling it not for the cover price of £28 but £14. It's like universal discount, so
These are pre-orders, aren't they, for the book?
I don't know if it's like deliberate overpricing to then make people think they're getting a bargain, or whether the demand is just not high enough.
It's not good look though, is it? I mean,
no.
If it's double price and it already...
But here's the ultimate put down. Anita Atkinson, 66, who owns the world's largest haul of royal memorabilia, said, it's not on my Christmas list.
Mine neither.
Let's confess, I'd rather saw off one of my own legs, but that's just me.
Did you watch the six-part thing, the Netflix?
I haven't watched.
Did anybody watch
any of it? I refuse to.
I watched the first couple, and then I've had enough, so I stopped after that.
Yeah.
Too much whining.
I had to. I fell asleep in most of it.
Let's move on, Nigel. A story in the Express about perfectionists.
Yeah.
Perfectionists face burnouts. Why is that?
This is because they're perfectionists. Because they're so pernickety about stuff that they're terribly reliable. They work very hard. This is kind of a lesson to bosses, really. And so everyone wants the kind of perfectionist worker, but the trouble is that they worry so much about it, can never meet the unrealistic targets they set for themselves, and as a result, they then suffer from burnout. So actually, employing a perfectionist worker is not necessarily a terribly good idea from the boss's point of view. And this is research from University of South Wales in Australia, and it says that the other things that happen is they tend to get angry with colleagues and irritated, their personal lives go to pot. So the answer is, workers who may not be always quite on the ball are perhaps better workers.
I'm a perfectionist. I'm all right. Lizzie, you're a perfectionist.
Apparently not, because I was showing me bra straps. I'm told to adjust myself.
People might say that is a form of perfectionist, but that wouldn't be. Right, let's move on to
this one about army control. It's in the Mail.
Yeah, there were scares that were quite justified that if you were trying to go on holiday today, you'd be scuppered by the lack of border control officers, and worse if you were trying to come in to the country or back into the country. But the army was sent in, and passengers have been reporting that it's marvellous. There are no queues. It's so efficient, and that's really taking the wind out of the sails of the Border Force Union. But there was also a cry from the public: why should these squaddies on 21,000 a year be doing the job of somebody on 32,000 a year and giving up the holidays to do it? So they're now being given £20 a day, these lads, in bonus, which is good. But my thoughts on this thing is, why does the army work and why do other public sector unions not? And the army lads do as they're told. They're treated, with respect, but they're given the instructions, and then they've signed up to carry them out. So what I'm thinking is, I don't want to bring back national service.
I think I do.
But why? Well, no, because that's forced. Why? That's forced. But why don't we start a kind of public service force?
Yeah.
People can sign up and get a decent wage, and they can fill in on jobs and things that are of the public interest.
Simon Calder, who of course is the travel guru, he came into GBNEWS earlier this week. He said that the border force strike has been the least effective strike of all time because the squaddies who stepped in were so effective. Nigel, we've got one final story before your epic 4-round marathon is over this morning, and we land finally in the Telegraph, obviously your natural home paper as a Labour fan. Spies must do better.
Yes, and this is from Sir Jeremy Fleming, who is the chief of GCHQ. What he's saying is that the only way of countering fake news is if spies weren't so secretive. So, in fact, the intelligence agencies have been great over Ukraine. They've been telling us what's been going on there, so we know what Vladimir Putin was doing. It wasn't a defensive operation. Problem with the intelligence agencies is they often confuse operational secrecy, which they need to have, with cultural secrecy because they think they just have to be secret. The more open they can be, the more the public will engage with keeping an eye out for terrorist attacks.
Superb. Great. Well, I think that concludes our morning's news review. Liz, you got a quick little chirpy thing on the end, so no.
I just said, I said to my son,
don't
do that. I said to my son, what's your job? And he goes, Mother, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I like it. That note. Mr. Nigel Nelson, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you very much for your time.